Children often learn new languages more easily than adults do, but it's unclear why. It means young children learn new languages more easily than adults, but we don't know why. Some hypothesize that grasping a language requires absorbing subtle patterns unconsciously, and that adult superior conscious reasoning interferes. In other words, some experts believe that learning a language happens by noticing patterns without thinking, but adults' strong thinking skills or adults' advanced logical thinking might make this harder. New research suggests that, indeed, grown-ups might just be too smart for their own good. To put it simply, recent research shows that being very smart might make it harder for adults to learn a new language. So, in the first paragraph, the author argues that children pick up languages more easily than adults, possibly because they unconsciously absorb patterns, while adults' analytical thinking gets in the way. New research supports the idea that being overly intelligent might be a disadvantage in language learning. For a recent study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, General, a group of Belgian adults simultaneously read and heard strings of 4 made-up words, such as Kieng Neef Seet Hayam. That is, a recent study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, General had Belgian adults read and listen to groups of 4 fake words at the same time. Specific consonants always appeared at the beginning or end of a word, if the word contained a certain vowel. In other words, some consonants were always at the start or end of a word when a certain vowel was used. Participants next read the sequences aloud quickly. It means, then, the participants had to say the words out loud and fast. Their ability to avoid mistakes doing so indicated how well they absorbed the consonant-vowel patterns. To put it another way, the fewer mistakes they made, the better they had learned the vowel and consonant patterns. As we have seen in paragraph 2, a study tested Belgian adults on language patterns using made-up words, not real words. Some consonants always appeared with certain vowels. Participants read and heard the words, then repeated them quickly. Fewer mistakes meant they had learned the patterns well. But before exposure to the new words, the participants had carried out a separate test, pressing keys to react to letters and numbers. It means, before learning the new words, participants did a different test where they pressed keys in response to letters and numbers. Some got a much faster, more mentally draining version of this test. In other words, some participants took a harder and faster version of the test, which was more exhausting. Those who tackled the difficult version claimed greater cognitive fatigue afterward, but performed better on the subsequent language task. It means the people who did the harder test felt more mentally tired, but they did better on the language task later. The researchers hypothesized that tired learners used less conscious analysis on the word rules. They were free to learn like a child. That is to say, scientists believe that tired learners thought less about the rules and learned the words more naturally, like children do. In this paragraph, the writer states that before learning new words, participants did a reaction test. Some had a harder, more tiring version. Those who got tired performed better in learning the words. Researchers think this happened because tired people relied less on thinking and learned more like children. Original for a related paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, USA, the team had English-speaking adults listen to streams of syllables secretly clustered into 3-syllable words. It means, in another study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, USA researchers played recordings of syllables for English-speaking adults. These syllables were grouped into hidden 3-syllable words. Later, they played pairs of 3-syllable clusters. One word in the pair came from the stream, and one was a new combination. In other words, the participants heard 2 word sets. One word was from the original recording, while the other was a new mix of syllables. The participants guessed which word was familiar, then rated their confidence. It means participants had to choose the word they thought sounded familiar. and then they had to say how sure they were about their choice. In short, in this paragraph, the writer says a study tested how adults recognize word patterns. They listened to syllables grouped into hidden words. Later, they had to pick the familiar words from pairs and rate their confidence. In one participant group, some had first done the original mentally draining test. It means one group of participants first completed the difficult mental test. In another, some had received magnetic pulses to disrupt activity in a brain area that previous research has linked to executive control. That is, another group received magnetic pulses that affected a brain area related to decision-making and control. In both groups, these interventions improved participants' performance on the syllable task when they were unsure about their answers, indicating unconscious parsing of speech. In other words, in both groups, these tests helped participants do better on the syllable task, especially when they were unsure, suggesting they processed speech unconsciously. Confident answers suggested conscious recall instead. It means if they were confident in their answers, it showed they were remembering consciously instead. Ghent University psychologist Eleanor Smalley, who spearheaded both papers, offers advice based on her team's findings. In other words, psychologist Eleanor Smalley from Ghent University, who led these studies, shares some advice from her research. When beginning to learn a language, she says, immerse yourself in its sounds, even or especially while distracted. It means, she suggests, that when learning a language, you should listen to its sounds as much as possible, even if you're distracted. So, in this part, the writer says that one group took a hard mental test, while another had brain activity disrupted with magnetic pulses. Both groups improved at recognizing syllables, especially when unsure, showing unconscious learning. Researcher Eleanor Smalley advises language learners to listen to the language's sounds often, even when distracted. 1. Participants with mentally draining test. Immediately before the experiment, participants performed an effortful dual working memory task under high load or low load conditions. The control group did not perform the task. To put it another way, just before the experiment, some participants took a challenging memory test with either a high or low level of difficulty. The control group did not take the test. 2. Participants with magnetic pulses. One group received magnetic pulses to their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. DLPF, see a part of the brain known to be closely related to declarative memory, remembering facts and or events, and cognitive control. The control group received no magnetic pulses. That is, another group had magnetic pulses applied to a brain area called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPF-C, which is important for memory and thinking. The control group did not receive any magnetic pulses. It means, in each experiment, the top graphs display how accurately participants recognized familiar words. The bottom graphs separate this accuracy into words remembered confidently, showing conscious thinking, and words recalled without confidence, indicating more unconscious guessing.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Some words imitate the sounds made by the things they describe, like buzz, or hiss, or zip. For you language lovers, that's called onomatopoeia. But what if the way a word sounds could evoke some other feature of an object, like its shape? Well, a new study suggests not only that it can, but that the same word can do so across multiple languages. The findings are in the journal Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B. The researchers were interested in studying the evolution of language.
Both the ancient origins of language going back hundreds of thousands of years ago or maybe even millions of years ago, and also the ongoing evolution of modern languages.
Marcus Perlman, a lecturer at the University of Birmingham in the UK. He says that a century ago, linguists insisted that the words we assign to various objects and actions are essentially arbitrary, and that words don't necessarily resemble or sound like the things to which they refer.
There's nothing doggy sounding about the word dog or feline sounding about the word cat.
Well, that makes sense, because different languages have different words for the same thing. One person's pup is another one's perro.
But there's a lot of evidence now suggesting that the arbitrariness doctrine is proving to be false.
Onomatopoeia is a case in point. And so is sign language, which makes frequent use of gestures that resemble their reference, like tracing the tracks of tears as a symbol for crying. To further explore this connection between words and their meanings, Perlman and his colleagues turned to something called the Bouba-Kiki effect.
What it is about is that when you see two shapes, one looks like a cloud or like a flower, it's kind of roundish, and the other one is more spiky, maybe looks more like a star. And when you're asked to say which one is Bouba, you will be more likely to point to a rounded one, and for Kiki, to a spiky one.
Alexandra Trick of the Leibniz Center General Linguistics in Berlin. She says that if you were to look at the words Bouba and Kiki, which are totally made up, one possible explanation for the effect could be the appearance of the letters.
The shape of B-O-U-B-A, right? The shapes of those letters kind of evoke the sense of roundness. These letters are round.
But what happens when you don't see the words, but hear them? And does it matter what language the listener speaks?
So we thought that would be a wonderful idea to just study Bouba-Kiki across the world.
With the help of 22 different collaborators, the researchers tested the Bouba-Kiki effect in 25 different languages, from Albanian and Armenian all the way to Zulu, with Farsi, French, and Finnish in between. Participants were told to look at the two shapes, and then listen to the sound, either
Bouba
or
Kiki.
Then they were asked which shape corresponds to the sound, whether they were German,
Welche Form gehört zu diesem Klang?
or Spanish,
¿Cuál figura corresponde al sonido?
Russian,
Для каждого слова, которое вы сейчас услышите, укажите, с какой из картинок оно у вас ассоциируется.
or Thai.
รูปร่างอันไหนสอดคล้องกับเสียงนี้
Most participants said the rounder shape was Bouba and the pointy one was Kiki.
This suggests that the effect is legit. It does seem to be driven by some widely observed correspondence between the spoken words and visual features of the shapes.
Well, there were some exceptions. Perlman says that speakers of Romanian, Turkish, and Mandarin Chinese were more likely to make the reverse call, although my Turkish friend and her family fell squarely in the classic Bouba-Kiki camp.
Baba has a round, fuller, and softer sound to it, and Kiki has a sharp and spiky sound like the spiky shape.
As to what that could mean about the evolution of language, imagine our early ancestors when they started using spoken words to refer to things.
They couldn't say, listen, my friend, now we're going to call this new object a table.
So, to get the conversation off the ground, they probably tried to come up with sounds that somehow evoked the object at hand.
And as a general principle, it might be that new words that are heard to resemble their reference in some way or another would have been more likely to be understood and adopted by a wider community of speakers.
So, if folks from far-flung cultures generally agree that Bouba is bulbous, while Kiki is sharp,
it shows us the potential of those correspondences to have been relevant at the very dawn of language, that in fact our ancestors could have relied upon those when establishing the first word forms.
Schreck says she'd like to explore the effects of other nonsense words, ones that use different consonants and vowel sounds.
But also testing real vocabularies of languages across these possible dimensions that evoke the sense of roundness or sharpness or maybe other sensations in us, because that might bring us closer to how diverse words came to be.
Which means that Buba and Kiki will not be the last word. Special thanks to my friends
Valerie Greger,
Denise Dalma,
Юрий Лазебник,
สุพัชยา ตรงเท่ง
and
Beri Asunar.
for Scientific Americans, 60 Second Science, I'm Karen Hopgood.
Buba, Kiki.